illegal under international law. Now, to talk more about this, we are joined by Mr. Bar-Yoshafat, analyst and attorney and political commentator, joining us from Jerusalem. Thank you for your time at Newswire. After the statement, after the swearing-in ceremony of the unity government in the Knesset, there was a statement by Prime Minister Netanyahu. He said that Israel should actually expand its sovereignty over the Palestinian territories, and we are looking that it is most likely to happen and start from 1st of July. Don't you think it is against the international law?
So first of all, thank you for having me on your show again. I think you're assuming what needs to be debated. I dispute the argument that Jews living in Judea is against international law. I know it is said very often in this channel, but that's actually not the case. And I think that the Pompeo doctrine pretty much gives another stamp on the fact that it is okay for Jews to live in Judea. Unfortunately for me, I'm not so optimistic, and I don't think that the Israeli government will actually do that. But I do hope that they will do it in the near future.
But Mr. Bar-Yoshafat, when we talk the United Nations Security Council resolution, particularly when we talk about the resolution number 242, which prohibits the occupation of the invaded territories during the wartime. So, and there are certain other Security Council resolutions, that is 446, that clearly states that the policy and the practices of Israel establishing settlements in the Palestinian and other Arab territories occupied since 1967 have no legal validity and constitute a serious obstruction to achieving a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in the Middle East.
Well, the Uti Posiditas Utis rules says definitely differently, but I have to say the people who literally wrote the Fourth Geneva Convention said that there's no problem with Jews living in Judea. And the United Nations, if they will vote on the fact that the earth is flat and that Israel has flattened it, would probably pass a resolution that would say, yes, it's Israel's fault. So I'm not sure that that's the criteria. And that is not how you treat international law. International law is combined of treaties and customs and agreements. And according to all the treaties, there is no problem with Jews living in Judea. I think that the mere statement that Jews living in Judea is a crime, I think is a very problematic statement. There has never been a Palestinian state, and people need to recognize the basic history. And the fact that there was a PA, a Palestinian Authority that was created, that is a novel thing. It's not something that's ancient. And that's the whole discussion. And some people like to assume what is debatable. And I'm sorry, but I disagree with the fact that people are saying that.
What about the Oslo Accords? You say that international law is comprised of the treaties, and there is no treaty as such between the Arabs and the Jews over there regarding these Palestinian territories. What about Oslo Accords?
Great. So first of all, just to be clear, in Israel proper, we have Jews and Arabs, Muslims, Christians, and so on and so forth, all equal citizens. In the Judea and Samaria territory, Jews are not allowed under the PA. But under the Oslo Accords, there's no restrictions of Jews living in Judea and Samaria. It's a very short document, and if people disagree with me, I really encourage them to read it. It's a 5-page document, and it says that the Israeli army should be withdrawn from the cities and the villages. It says nothing about Jews living in Judea. In fact, a few years after the Oslo Accords in 1999, the PA sent a letter to the Israeli government saying they want the Israeli forces to withdraw from the cities and villages, but obviously they're not referring to the settlements, the Jewish settlements.
And when we talk about the international law, so treaties happen to be the very basics on which this particular international law is based. But when we talk about the jurisdiction of the Security Council, its mandate is to keep peace in the world and not let any major conflict happen. But when this annexation, which is deemed illegal by not only the Muslim world, but by also the EU, the UK has criticized, the UN has also warned about this particular thing. So Israel and the US seem to be taking a solo flight.
I'm not sure I agree here, but I have to say that let's just make one thing clear. The crime that we're being accused of is that we're living and building in Judea and Samaria, whereas the PA incites for terror, gives money for terrorists, and when someone murders a Jew, they're being glorified. That is a violation of international law. The fact that the Jew builds a house in Judea, how can that be a crime? Now, the fact that there are countries who argue that, that's fine, but that's not international law. That is a political opinion. They're allowed to have a wrong political opinion, but it doesn't make it international law. Actually, according to international law, there is no restrictions of Jews living in Judea and Samaria. You mentioned the Oslo Accords, which is the most binding right now because that's the agreement between the PA and Israel. There's no restriction. According to the Fourth Geneva Convention, there's no restriction. And the mere concept of saying Jews should not live somewhere, I hope that in the common sense of people that it makes sense that that's not a violation of international law.
Okay, you're joined by Dr. Nikolai Dugunnison. Thank you very much for your time. He is joining us from London. He is analyst from Kingston University in London, and his PhD thesis focuses on the legitimacy of Arab governments during the Arab Spring and non-democratic political legitimacy. Thank you very much for your time. So we have seen a statement by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying that the new government should extend and take over the territories which are Palestinian territories and which is considered illegal internationally, which has been slammed by not only the Muslim world, but also by the EU, the UK, and the UN as well. How do you see this one?
Well, firstly, as far as I'm aware, this plan is subject to U.S. approval. And I mention this simply because it's a reminder of how close Netanyahu is to Trump and the fact that the U.S. is effectively Israel's strongest ally. Let's remember that Netanyahu, he's one of the longest-serving prime ministers in Israel, but he has survived several coalition governments, several moments of re-election, and there are some who argue that he has yet to leave a legacy other than being the longest-serving prime minister of Israel. So in a sense, such an annexation would leave a legacy and would be a very strong political move if it goes ahead. Another issue is to what extent there will be a regional reaction. We've seen how Netanyahu has been progressively more emboldened during his tenure by Trump. So, for example, his declaration regarding Jerusalem and the Golan Heights. Now we see the annexation possibly of the West Bank. I struggle to see how Arab nations would be able to react in a manner that shows a lot of substance, because some of these regimes are also U.S. allies. For example, Jordan has recently announced that should the annexation go ahead, Jordan will come into conflict with Israel. And I don't see how much wiggle room Jordan would have other than possibly canceling its peace treaty with Israel, because Jordan, like other Arab states, is a U.S. ally, and in Jordan's case, it is reliant on U.S. aid as well.
Okay, Mr. Dugunnison, please stay with us. Mr. Bar-Yoshafat, very quickly, when you say that this, whatever is being done by or is being stated by the Israeli government or the Prime Minister, it's not against the international law. So why does the EU, the UK, and the UN criticizes or warns of sort of a conflict in this particular region?
UN is compelled of many countries. Not all of them are very supportive of Israel. And I literally wrote a policy paper to show the bias of the UN against Israel. But that's not the question, because international law is not what the UN thinks or says in these and those committees, because it has no actual power. The UN can condemn many countries. By the way, if you take the General Assembly, for instance, most of their conversations is about Israel, which is a tiny country and is definitely not something you compare to Syria or any other countries in that region, yet they focus on Israel. So that doesn't make it an honest claim or a legal claim. Now, again, politically, people can say that they're against Jews living in Judea. We're called Jews because we come from Judea. I'm not sure how we can occupy our own territory.
Okay,
but
point well taken,
opinion.
Mr. Bar-Yoshafat. Thank you very much for your time at News Analyst and commentator and political commentator and attorney joining us from Jerusalem. Mr. Dugunnison, I'll come back to you. When we talk